Today's cooking demonstration is another one of the one-pot meals that I find so useful. Saves you a lot of messing around with lots of dishes, and for me, I like things that are simple. Okay, so there's a bit of a story behind this afternoon's recipe, and I hope you've got it in front of you. It's the African beans recipe. Okay, now I haven't written the ingredients in order, but I'm just going to begin by putting a little bit of oil in our pot here to get that heated up. It's been well wrapped. I'm just going to put a little bit in here, just enough to get that going. And I'm sure you all know how to chop up an onion, so I'm not going to chop that up in front of you today. I'm just going to get those cooking. As I told you last week, one of the keys to getting a recipe right is not rushing the onions. Okay, you've got to get the onions cooked well. And so that means taking your time at least with that part of the recipe. Okay, so I'm just going to get those in there and get that sautéing while I tell you about this recipe. Now, you're probably wondering why I've called it African beans. If any of you have been to Africa, you're probably thinking there's nothing much that's African about this recipe. I used to have some young people come over to our house on a Wednesday night, and these kids were Bible students, and we would have a Bible study at my house. They were just young kids, about, 12, 13, 14. But I noticed that when we put on dinner for them before the study, they never ate anything. And I thought, well, maybe they're used to eating different food in Africa than what they eat here. So after a few weeks of this happening, and their plates coming back to the kitchen with a clean plate on top, but all the food's still underneath, I spoke to their mother, and I said, what do they eat at home? Have you got a plant-based recipe that I can use to feed these guys that they might like? And so she gave me this recipe, and I don't know what it was called, but I called it African beans because she was from Africa and it's beans. Okay, so that's how it got its name, and it was a hit, and we never had any problems after that, although I do wonder if I served beans a few too many times. Right, so we're just sautéing these, and as I mentioned last week, we wait until they are clear before we move on to the next part. Okay, now they're just getting there now. I'd probably do those a few minutes longer, but I'm going to add to this a couple of cloves of garlic. Now I've already chopped one clove of garlic, but I thought you might find it interesting because I always wondered the best way to chop up garlic. And someone showed me this, so I thought I would show you. I don't know if you can see on the screen there. I have a clove of garlic here. I chop off the end at the bottom. You chop off the end at the top. Keep those out of the way. Then you get your knife and you just crush it. Make sure you don't cut your hand off because one end of the knife is very sharp. And you'll notice there that the skin has just started to flake off. Yeah, and it's much easier to get the skin off if you crush it than if you try and peel it with your fingers. Probably I'm telling you something you already know, but that was news to me. So if you're ever wondering how to peel garlic in a hurry, that's probably the best way to do it. Just going to cut this up a bit here. Right, I'm going to whack that in there. Now you don't want to burn your garlic, so that's why I've just lowered the heat a little bit there. And that is in total 2 cloves of garlic going in there. You just want to lightly cook it, and once you see the garlic start to simmer in the bottom of your pot, you know that you're about right. Okay. Now while those are still going, we'll move on to our next part, which is adding the salt and turmeric. Salt you just do to taste, but we don't want too much salt. Okay, so I'm just going to put a sprinkle of salt in here, not too much. Stir that in. It's good practice to add your salt to your onions so you don't forget, so that every time you cook, you make sure you put the salt in. Now, turmeric wasn't in the original recipe, but I think it's quite good for you and I quite like the taste of it. Important to add it somewhere near the beginning to make sure it's cooked, because it has quite a strong flavour to it. So I'm just going to put a couple of sprinkles in here, like that, and just let that fry on the bottom of my pot here. I'm not sure if you can see the pot on the screen. Not really well. Just move it that way a touch. I'm just putting that in there so that it just browns a little bit. Okay, those onions are looking nice and clear, so I think we're ready to kind of move on to our next stage here. Now today I've got fresh tomatoes, but you can substitute a tin of tomatoes if you want to. The only thing to be aware of with tomatoes is they can be a little bit not sweet, a little bit bitter. Okay, so I use either a little bit of honey to sweeten that, if you use honey, or you can use, as I'm going to use today, dates. Now last week Leslie showed you how to make banana pops, and she used dates as a sweetener. And they are a fantastic sweetener. You might be interested to know, if you don't remember from last week, that they also have what in them? Fibre, yeah? Lots of fibre in dates. Okay, so you're getting not just the sweetness, but you're also getting the fibre. Okay, now on the recipe here, I've said 2 tomatoes. And the other great thing about this recipe is that you don't have to be exact. Now I had 3 tomatoes sitting there, and if you have half a tomato in the fridge, which sometimes you'll have, you just whack it in. It won't matter. Okay, you'll find out kind of how you like the taste of it. Now the reason I'm chopping these, by the way, is not only because they cook faster, but you don't want big bits of skin in there. So you can either take the time to peel the tomatoes, or you can just chop them up. Okay, mixing that through. Now, as I said, to sweeten it, I've got some dates here, and I've said about 15. Again, there's no rule for this, it just depends how you like your food. Now, of course, in Africa, probably they don't have a lot of sweetener to their savoury dishes, but out here in Western diet, we like our food a little bit sweeter. And the reason I'm chopping the dates also is not only because they break down quicker, but when you get them from the supermarket, they say they're pitted, but there's nothing worse than biting into something and finding a date stone. Yeah. So I'm just chopping these. There you go. I'm going to add those now. Stir that in there. Just going to get a little bit of water to add to this. Just to help those dates break down a little bit. Cook that on there. Okay, so far so good. Easy enough. Nothing hard about that. All right. A couple of minutes. Now, what have I missed here? Oh, that's right. We need the peppers added. Again, see, I've got it in the wrong order, but it doesn't really matter, okay? It's a kind of recipe you can kind of just chuck everything in. In fact, when they asked me to write it down, I sort of struggled. Have you got recipes like that? Things you just make that you never actually use off a recipe? So I've said kind of 1 small green one and 1 small red one. Well, I had 1 big green one and a yellow one and a red one. Doesn't matter. It's all just a bit of colour. Of course, the green pepper is not as sweet. Everyone has their way of cutting up peppers. This is my way. So just going to chop this. Again, you don't need to be exact. As long as you don't chop your finger off, you can kind of be as rough as you like. Put that in there. The green bit at the top doesn't taste too good, so we'll leave that out. Now I'm told that you can actually add the seeds to your recipes, but it can make it a little bit bitter. So again, I don't like bitter food, so I'm leaving that out. And one red one to come. Doesn't matter if a few get in there, just as long as you don't leave them all in. You see this recipe is starting to look quite colourful now, and one of the things that I've learned about food is that if it doesn't look good, people won't eat it, and they probably won't think it tastes good either. And if you didn't know that before, you just wait till you have children. And children are the first people that will look at a recipe and say, it doesn't look nice, I don't want to eat it. Okay? So I'm not sure if you can see that on your screen, but you see that now? It's looking kind of colourful, hey? So that's a good sign. I've got some heat under there. Now, last week I introduced you to Massels stock cubes. Don't be alarmed, it says chicken. There's no chicken in it, okay? So I've said about half a stock cube. If you don't like half a stock cube sitting around, the other one I'm using today is the beef one. There's no beef in that either, okay? If people are obsessed about having some meat, just don't tell them it doesn't have beef in it. Okay, so I'm just going to add half a stock cube there, and I'll wrap the other half up for next time, because this is a very popular recipe. One of the other things when we were becoming plant-based is trying to deal with the kids, because their tastes are formed very early on. So the earlier you can get kids onto a plant-based diet, the easier it will be. But if you're wondering if a recipe is going to work, just try it on your kids first, and if they like it, you're good to go. All right? So just while that's cooking away there, what's our next thing? Now I've said you can add parsley if you want. I went to the supermarket today because I didn't have any parsley in the garden, and all the parsley looked a bit lame, so I just left it there. Okay, but if you have parsley in the garden and you like the taste of parsley, I chop that in towards the end. Right, beans. What have we got here? A tin of 4-bean mix. Some people like to cook their own beans. That's fine if you're a person that boils up beans and soaks them overnight and all that sort of thing. I remember my mother used to do that. Then that's fine. But this is very convenient. You get 4 different types of beans in the one tin. You just drain the tin and in it goes. Hopefully. Now I have here also a tin of red kidney beans, which I've drained that as well. Now, depending on how you like your mix at the end, I like it to be a little bit pasty, because if you've ever had like wraps, you can use a pasty mixture and put it in the middle with all your salads and wrap it up, instead of meat. If you wanted a bit more like a soup that you can have with rice, then probably add a little bit more water to it, and don't do what I'm going to do right now, which is, if I had a smaller knife I'd use that. Just get your knife in here. You can do it on the board if you like, but it will make a big mess. And what I'm doing is I'm just chopping these beans. Make sure your knife's in properly first so you don't chop your hand off. And what that does is it will just help to thicken the mixture so that it's not all runny. Yeah? And you'll see today that the one you end up eating is not a runny mix, because I've mashed up some of the beans already. Okay, and see if you can see that there. Okay, so it's starting to look quite good. Mix that through. I'd probably add a little bit more water to this, just a small bit, and just leave it to simmer for a few minutes. And I think I've put everything in. I think that's about it. Yeah. Now I do make a little bit of a mess when I cook, as my wife will tell you. So I'm going to have to clean this one up today myself. But I would just, as I say, leave that simmering for a few more minutes, and that's your mix. And you can use it, as I said, in wraps. You can eat it with rice. Some people like nachos. If you like doing that, it's a good mix to put on top of corn chips and have your salads on top. Where I come from, they call that haystacks. Have you heard of that? Corn chips with a bean mix on top and chopped lettuce and tomato and that sort of thing on top, and it's a nice mix. Yeah, so there you go. That's an easy recipe that even if you don't know how to cook, it's pretty simple, eh? You just throw it in the pot and wait. Yeah, that's it. There you go, you can see that there?
Good.
Yeah? Well, you'll get to try it soon.